They kicked me out on my 30th birthday. No cake, no hugs, just a cold stare from my dad and the words, "It's time you left." I'm Emily, and for years I paid their bills, fixed their house, and believed loyalty would eventually be returned. But that night, instead of crying, I opened my laptop and started taking back everything that was in my name: electricity, water, internet, even their car insurance. They thought I was just the daughter who stayed quiet. They forgot I was also the one holding their world together. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments, and if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way, I can send you a special greeting. Now, let's start the story together. I pulled into the driveway just as the last streaks of daylight disappeared behind the trees. The house looked exactly the same as it always did: peeling white paint, a gutter hanging half loose, and a porch light that flickered every few seconds like it was gasping for attention. I sat there in the car for a minute longer, engine off, keys still in hand. On the passenger seat sat a small grocery store cake, the kind that comes in a plastic dome. Vanilla frosting, uneven red letters that spelled out, "Happy Birthday," and a candle I'd tossed in last minute, more out of habit than hope. I didn't expect a party. I hadn't expected anything in years, really, but I suppose some part of me still carried that ridiculous thread of hope that someone might have remembered, or at least pretended to. The front door creaked as I opened it, the familiar scent of overcooked meat and something faintly metallic settling into my nose. I stepped inside, clutching the cake like it was something fragile, though the bag was already sagging at the bottom. No one greeted me. The hallway was quiet except for the hum of the kitchen light and the sound of a fork clinking against a plate. Dinner was already on the table: meatloaf, canned green beans, and mashed potatoes from a box. It could have been any Tuesday. I didn't bother taking off my coat right away. The silence in the room felt heavy, not angry, just tired. Like the house itself was exhausted of trying to pretend we were a family. Dad, Richard, sat at the head of the table, glass of something amber already half empty. He didn't look up. "You're late," he muttered. I placed the cake down gently on the counter. The plastic bag crinkled louder than I intended. "I had a few reports to finish up," I said. My voice was steady. Not warm, not cold, just flat, safe. He grunted and poured another inch of whiskey into his chipped glass. Mom, Diane, barely looked up from her plate. She was fussing with her fork like it had done something to offend her. Her eyes didn't meet mine. I finally shrugged off my coat and hung it on the same hook I'd used since high school. Then I took my seat, folding my hands in my lap. The rhythm of dinner resumed, chewing, swallowing, the occasional clink of utensils. No happy birthday, not even a nod. I stared at my plate. The mashed potatoes looked like wallpaper paste. The meatloaf had that too uniform shape that suggested it had been sitting under foil for hours. I moved some beans around with my fork, mostly to fill the silence. Halfway through, Dad set his utensils down, not gently. The sound snapped through the room like a twig underfoot. Mom flinched. I looked up. He leaned back in his chair, looking me dead in the eye. "You're too old to be freeloading," he said. "It's time you left." For a second, I thought I misheard him. The words hung there, absurd in their clarity. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." He took a sip, then pointed a thick finger at me. 30 years old, still here, eating my food, living under my roof. It's time to grow up. I felt something shift inside me. Not break exactly, just tilt. Like a picture that had always hung crooked but I'd never noticed before. "I pay the internet bill," I said, keeping my voice even. "The electric, groceries, half the mortgage. You know that." He gave a sharp, joyless laugh. "Paying a few bills doesn't mean you get a lifetime pass. You're not a kid anymore, Emily. You're a burden." Burden. That word did something to me. Mom still didn't speak. She stared down at her plate, jaw tight. I turned to her, searching for something. Disbelief, defense, anything, but she wouldn't look at me. Her silence stung more than his words. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had filled out insurance forms when he chipped a molar, the same hands that had written checks for past due notices, wiped down their kitchen counters, fixed their router, shoveled snow while they watched TV. I nodded slowly once. Got it. Dad leaned back like he'd scored a point. Mom didn't move. I stood up. My plate was still half full, but I didn't have the appetite anymore. I picked up the cake from the counter, its plastic handle cutting into my fingers from the weight. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't yell. I just climbed the stairs one last time. Each step creaked like it was trying to change my mind. Upstairs, my room looked exactly as I left it. Too neat, too silent. On the bed sat a half-packed suitcase. I'd started putting things together a few weeks ago just in case. I guess I knew this was coming. I just didn't expect it to be tonight. I laid the cake gently on the desk next to a stack of unopened mail and a burned-out candle from last year. The frosting had smeared inside the box, the candle leaning sideways like it had given up standing. I peeled off my sweater and folded it into the suitcase, then my jeans, then my charger. My hands moved automatically, not rushed, just resigned. When I zipped the bag, the sound echoed strangely in the room, like something final. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the cake. One candle missing, one person missing, one family that had let go of me like I was never really theirs to begin with. After a long pause, I reached under the bed and pulled out my old laptop. The screen flickered to life. The same screen I'd used to pay every bill, monitor every account, fix every emergency they conveniently forgot how to handle. My hand hovered over the keyboard. The electric bill login page blinked softly in the browser tab. I stared at it for a long time, the light of the screen painting my face in pale blue. Maybe this time, the silence would belong to me. I woke to the quiet hum of Jesse's refrigerator and the faint rattle of leaves scraping against the window pane. The guest room was small, barely big enough for the fold-out cot and a mismatched dresser, but it was warm. Not just from the heating, but from the stillness of a place where no one looked at me like I was a problem waiting to be solved. Outside, November had fully arrived. The air carried that damp, unforgiving chill, and the trees stood mostly bare, their last orange and gold remnants scattered across the sidewalks. I wrapped myself in Jessie's oversized flannel robe and padded into the kitchen, where she'd already left a mug and the coffee pot half full, as if she knew I'd be up before her. I poured myself a cup and sat at the kitchen table, which was more of a reclaimed desk wedged into the corner between the pantry and a shelf of worn cookbooks. The table was cluttered with unopened mail, a dying plant Jessie kept forgetting to water, and a stack of coasters that looked like they'd never been used. I took a sip. Bitter. Too strong. Perfect. Reaching for my laptop, I let it boot while I grabbed a yellow legal pad from my bag. The paper was still crisp, the top line untouched. I uncapped a pen and wrote one word at the top. Disconnect. Dad once joked. Good thing you pay the bills. I remembered the way he said it. Half smirk, half dismissive. He didn't mean it as gratitude. He meant it as leverage. Now it was leverage I'd be taking back. The screen blinked to life. I opened a tab and pulled up the electric company first. The login still remembered my username. I entered my password slowly, deliberately. My fingers didn't shake. This wasn't about anger. This was about closure. Click. Settings. Remove payment method. Confirm. Click. I paused to sip more coffee. The spoon clinked softly against the ceramic as I stirred the bitterness. One down. Next came water, then gas, then internet. Each account bore my name at the top, a reminder that I hadn't just lived in that house. I'd held it together, quietly and visibly out of some misplaced hope that love could be proven through service. Jessie walked in, hair tousled, still in pajamas. She gave me a soft smile and poured herself some coffee without a word. After a moment, she leaned over to peek at the notepad. You making a hit list? In a way, I said, not looking up. She nodded like she understood more than I said. I continued. Netflix, canceled. Cell phone plan, removed both parents from the shared family line. Their devices would stay connected through the end of the billing cycle. After that, silence. I took another sip and opened the file with all my household expenses. There were tabs for everything: repairs, groceries, even the time I'd paid for a plumber when the kitchen sink backed up. I remembered Dad blaming cheap pipes while I covered the invoice. I remembered Mom calling me so responsible as she handed me a grocery list 5 minutes later. "Need a break?" Jessie asked gently. I shook my head. "I'm okay." But my chest felt tight. Still, I moved on. The joint emergency savings account came last. It was the one Mom had insisted we keep, just in case. I logged in and changed the settings, revoking her access. The bank flagged it for verification, but I knew it would go through. It was my money. It always had been. I paused there, staring at the screen. Jessie sat across from me now, holding her mug in both hands. "You don't have to explain anything," she said, "but if you want to, I'm here." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at the yellow pad and began writing a list. One by one, I wrote down every service I had canceled, every account I had closed, every link between me and that house that no longer existed. Electric, water, gas, internet, cell plan, Netflix, joint account. At the bottom of the page, I added one more line in all caps. "They lost me." I underlined it twice. A small gust of wind pressed against the kitchen window, rattling it slightly. Jessie glanced toward the sound, then back at me. "Do you feel lighter yet?" she asked. I thought about it. The truth was, I didn't feel light. I felt hollow. But it was a clean kind of hollow, like a house finally emptied after years of storing someone else's junk. "I don't feel anything yet," I said, "but I think that's the point." We sat in silence for a few minutes. Jessie reached over and added a splash of creamer to her coffee. I took another sip of mine, now lukewarm. My phone buzzed against the table. Voicemail. The screen lit up with Mom's name, Diane Marin. Jessie raised an eyebrow. "You gonna listen?" I stared at the phone, then tapped to play it on speaker. Mom's voice came through soft, uncertain. "Hi, honey. I think maybe there's been a mistake. I noticed some of the services aren't working, and I thought maybe it was a mix-up. We're still your parents, Emily. Can you please call me back?" There was a pause, like she was waiting for me to speak from the other end. Then the message ended. Jessie looked at me, but didn't say anything. I tapped the screen to delete the voicemail. Then I turned back to the pad, eyes settling on the last line. They didn't lose the heat, or the internet, or the phone. They lost me. And for the first time, I wasn't rushing to fix it. The lights went out at 6:07 a.m., not just in their house, but in the illusion that I could somehow slip away quietly. That morning, before the sun had even bothered to rise, I realized this wasn't just about me leaving. It was about them losing the story. I rolled over in Jessie's guest bed, blinking blearily at the phone vibrating nonstop on the nightstand. 12 missed calls, 4 from Mom, 6 from Dad, 2 from numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't need to listen to the voicemails. I could guess their content already. Confusion, accusations, guilt coated in syrup. A soft knock came at the door. Jessie peeked in with a mug in each hand. "You're gonna want this," she said. I sat up, grateful for the coffee, but not quite ready to face what came next. "How bad is it?" She handed me one of the mugs. "Worse than you think." My phone buzzed again. This time, a message from Zach. "Zach, did you see what your dad just posted? It's already got 60 comments." I opened the link with the kind of dread that settles into your bones. There, in bold letters, was Richard Marin's status, shared to the local Springfield Community Forum. Our daughter turned her back on us. No lights, no food, nothing but silence. We gave her everything. Pray for us. The image attached showed the front porch in darkness, a bag of groceries sitting untouched near the steps. I recognized the bag. Mom always reused the same faded one from the town pharmacy. I scrolled through the comments, jaw tight. Unbelievable. After all they've done for her? Some kids are just spoiled. Didn't she live there rent-free? Sounds like she needs a wake-up call. I swallowed hard. Then came a different kind of comment. Wait, isn't she the one who paid for their roof repair last year? I saw her carrying groceries through a snowstorm last winter while they stayed inside. Those came from anonymous accounts, but I knew they were neighbors, people who had seen more than they ever said out loud. Jessie sat beside me now, reading over my shoulder. Don't respond, she said quietly. Not yet. I nodded, though my hand itched to type something. Anything. To set the record straight. But she was right. This wasn't the moment to react. This was the moment to remember who I was. Not the daughter they painted in public, but the one who carried the weight for too long. Another ping from Zach. Zach. Local bakery owner just commented too. Said you bought groceries for your mom every week last year. I blinked. The truth had a way of surfacing, even when buried under shame. I closed the app and opened my laptop instead. The screen lit the room in soft, sterile white. I navigated to a folder I hadn't opened in months, one I had started keeping back when I began suspecting none of my support would ever be acknowledged. The folder was titled Evidence. Inside were PDFs, photos, screenshots, bills paid in full, receipts from hardware stores, emails to contractors, statements from the utility companies, all addressed to me. I scrolled slowly, the cursor blinking like a steady heartbeat. I hadn't looked at these files in a long time. Not because I'd forgotten them, but because part of me hoped I'd never need them. But hope was for people still clinging to the idea that truth could be shared with the people who had rejected it over and over again. Outside, a garbage truck rattled down the street, brakes squealing in the distance. Inside, all I could hear was the soft click of my mouse as I began scanning each file, one by one. Jessie didn't interrupt. She simply brought another mug of coffee and set it beside me before disappearing into the kitchen. The warmth of it seeped into my palm, grounding me. I labeled each document carefully. Roof repair March 2021, Duke Energy November 2022, joint account transfers. Each name was another thread pulled from the tangled story my parents were trying to weave. I paused only once, to read an email from last year. It was from my mom asking me to cover a sudden car repair. "We'll pay you back next month," she'd written. They never did. I never asked. The cursor hovered for a moment before I saved the email as a PDF and dropped it into the folder. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I organized. Because control didn't come from shouting louder than them. It came from being undeniable. Later that afternoon, Zach texted again. "Zach, they're saying you left them with nothing, but I remember who paid for Uncle Dan's meds when his insurance ran out. Just saying." I smiled faintly, fingers resting over the keyboard. Jessie returned with a bowl of soup, chicken and rice, warm and plain. She set it down without a word. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. Better than I expected. She didn't press. She knew what it meant when someone like me said that. We ate quietly while my laptop continued its soft, steady hum. On the screen, the folder grew fatter with each file. I didn't know exactly what I'd do with it yet, but it was ready. I was ready. And when the time came, I wouldn't need to shout. I'd let the truth do the talking. I didn't yell, I didn't beg. I posted. The words sat heavy in my mind as I stared at the blinking cursor on my laptop. It was late November, and the streets below Jessie's apartment had started to shimmer with early Christmas lights. Candy cane stakes lined the sidewalk, a glowing reindeer peeked from someone's front yard, and a plastic Santa clung awkwardly to the edge of a fire escape across the street. Everything looked festive, cheerful, even warm. But inside the apartment, the air was thick with quiet anticipation and the faint scent of peppermint coffee Jessie had brewed hours ago. My laptop hummed quietly. The folder labeled Evidence sat open, its contents laid bare like the receipts of a quiet war I'd been fighting alone. Next to the laptop, on my desk, sat the little birthday candle from the cake that never got lit. Its red wax was chipped along the side, the base slightly melted from years of storage, and maybe one too many summers pressed against forgotten junk in a closet drawer. Crooked, insignificant, but somehow it had survived, like me. Jessie came up behind me, holding a second mug. "It's ready?" she asked softly. I nodded. Almost. We had spent the afternoon sorting through everything. Utility bills in my name dating back 5 years, screenshots of mortgage payments, photos of the leaking roof I patched myself one summer, even an invoice from the time I bought Mom a new set of tires during a snowstorm and skipped work to get them installed. Everything had a date. Everything had proof. Now all that remained was turning it into a story. I opened a blank post in the Springfield Community Facebook group. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. The truth behind the silence. That would be the title. Beneath it, I began typing, slowly, deliberately. I didn't want to sound angry. I wanted to sound undeniable. For years, I stayed quiet. I thought if I just kept helping, kept paying, kept sacrificing, it would mean something. But when I turned 30, I was told I was too old to live under the same roof. I was asked to leave, and I did. What followed was silence, then shame, then public posts that painted me as selfish and cruel. So here's the truth. The electric bill was in my name. So was the water. So was the internet. I contributed monthly to the mortgage, paid for home repairs, even shared a joint savings account for emergencies. Not once was I asked if it was too much. I was only expected to continue. I'm not posting this for sympathy. I'm posting this because silence only helps those who benefit from it. Below are the documents, the screenshots, the dates, the evidence. I attached 12 files, clean, labeled, final. My eyes drifted again to the crooked candle beside me. That settled it. I hit post. For a long moment, nothing happened. I stared at the screen. Jessie stood beside me, waiting but saying nothing. Then, ping, a comment, then another, then 5. In less than 10 minutes, the post had 30 comments and had been shared more than 100 times. Jessie refreshed the page. "You might want to breathe." I realized I hadn't. The comments poured in, some shocked, others quietly supportive. This is heartbreaking. I always wondered why she never moved out. Now I know. I remember seeing her fixing the shingles during that storm. Her dad was on the porch yelling about the news. That last one came from a name I recognized, Mrs. Claremont, the woman who lived 2 houses down from us. I hadn't spoken to her since high school. Another comment, I saw her carrying 3 bags of groceries in the snow while her mom just watched from the window. I leaned back in my chair. The cursor blinked on the screen like a quiet drumbeat. Jessie was still scrolling. 300 shares. She refreshed again. 700 likes. It's growing fast. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just felt a strange kind of stillness. For once, the story wasn't just theirs to tell. It didn't take long for Dad to respond. About 2 hours later, his name popped up in the same group. We all have disagreements in families. Some people choose to air private matters for attention. Sad to see our daughter exaggerating for sympathy. Jessie sucked in a breath. Wow, he really doesn't know when to quit. But the comments told a different story this time. Didn't she pay your water bill last year? Funny how the freeloader was also the one buying groceries. You had no problem cashing her checks. Now she's the villain? The tide had turned. For every attempt he made to discredit me, a dozen voices stood up in the comments. Some I didn't even know. Old classmates, neighbors. Even a former teacher chimed in with, "She always stayed after school to help set up community events." That doesn't sound like someone looking for attention. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay awake. The glow of the laptop screen dimmed now, its work complete. The candle still sat on the desk, a quiet witness to everything. At 11:43 p.m., my phone buzzed. Voicemail. It was Mom. I hesitated for a long second before pressing play. Her voice was soft, shaky. "Emily, please. We didn't know it would go this far. People are calling us, messaging us. Your father, he's upset. I didn't think it would turn into this. Please, take it down. We're still your parents." Still your parents. I set the phone down slowly. That phrase rang in my ears, echoing against every corner of the quiet room. They had been my parents when it was convenient, when it meant groceries and light bills and birthday cakes bought with my overtime hours. But when I asked for kindness, for acknowledgement, for space to simply exist as more than a utility, they had chosen silence. Now the silence was theirs. And for once, the truth spoke louder than either of them. They sued me for betrayal, so I filed for truth. The envelope came on a Wednesday morning, tucked under Jesse's welcome mat like a forgotten coupon flyer. A uniformed officer knocked twice before leaving, offering nothing but a polite nod when Jessie opened the door in her slippers. I was still rinsing out my coffee mug when she handed it to me, her face already tight with concern. "It's for you," she said, "from your dad." I took the envelope without flinching, but my fingers curled tighter around it than I meant to. It was thick, legal. My name typed across the front in blocky, impersonal font. I walked to the kitchen table, sat down slowly, and opened it. Civil suit, allegations of abandonment, emotional elder abuse, financial theft. I let out a quiet breath, not a sob, not a scream, just a long, tired breath. It didn't sting the way I thought it might. It felt predictable, like a play I'd read 100 times and knew the ending by heart. Jessie sat across from me, watching my face. "What are you going to do?" I folded the papers back into the envelope. "I'm going to file back." An hour later, I was walking up the cracked front steps of the Springfield Legal Aid Office. The building was small, plain, the kind of place people passed every day without noticing. Peeling beige paint, a faded blue sign, a locked filing cabinet beside the receptionist's desk with a sticky note labeled "Confidential" barely hanging on. But inside there was something else, a kind of quiet sturdiness. Like truth might live here too, in manila folders and well-worn binders. I met with a woman named Mrs. Reynolds, short gray hair, reading glasses on a chain, and the kind of voice that never needed to be raised to be heard. She glanced at the envelope I placed on her desk, then at the folders I carried under my arm. "I have proof," I said, "a lot of it." "Let's take a look," she replied calmly, sliding the file toward her. As I spoke, she flipped through years of documentation, utility bills with my name on them, bank statements showing mortgage contributions, screenshots of joint account transfers, emails about repairs, receipts for tires, shingles, plumbing patches. She didn't interrupt once, just nodded slowly, page by page. When I finished, she looked up over her glasses. "Emily," she said, "this is one of the most thorough personal records I've seen in a long time. You're not just prepared, you're right." That simple sentence made my chest feel just a little less tight. "Here's what we'll do," she continued. "We'll file a counterclaim. You'll outline financial coercion, long-term emotional manipulation, and unpaid domestic labor. You weren't just a daughter. They turned you into a full-time support system. We'll call it what it is." I nodded. "Okay." "They might try mediation first," she added. "It's standard. Don't worry. I'll be there." And she was. 2 weeks later, just as December's cold settled into the corners of the courthouse like frostbite, I sat across from my parents in a cramped mediation room at the Springfield station. The chairs were hard plastic. The radiator hissed in the corner, never quite warming the space. A metal desk separated us. Jessie sat to my right. Mrs. Reynolds across from the mediator. Richard was already red in the face before we'd even begun. Diane wore a black cardigan and clutched a tissue with trembling fingers. Her eyes darted everywhere but mine. "She's turning this into a circus," Richard barked. "We were just trying to get her to grow up." Mrs. Reynolds folded her hands. "Your client filed a public post, yes, But you filed a lawsuit, one that has no basis. We have documentation for every claim. She exaggerated everything. Then let's let the judge decide, Mrs. Reynolds replied without blinking. But I'll be filing a countersuit. Defamation, financial exploitation, and emotional coercion. Our evidence exceeds 100 pages. Richard's mouth opened, but no words came out. Just that familiar rage, the kind that couldn't find a target because it no longer had power. Diane's voice was barely audible. We didn't think she'd fight back. I finally spoke then. My voice was even. I was just a kid, I said. I paid your mortgage. Silence. The mediator cleared his throat. Mr. and Mrs. Marin, we recommend withdrawal of your suit before escalation. The counterclaim has strong merit. Richard muttered something under his breath. Diane dabbed at her eyes. And I? I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. Outside, snow had started to fall, just a light dusting at first, turning the sidewalks into a shimmer of white. I pulled my coat tighter as I stepped into the wind, but for the first time in months, I wasn't cold inside. Jessie joined me at the top of the courthouse steps, her boots crunching beside mine. You did it, she said. I nodded. I'm done explaining. No more trying to make them see me, no more performing worth. Just the truth, and the people who chose to believe it. We walked back to the car in silence, the kind that felt like exhaling. In the rearview mirror, the courthouse faded behind us, swallowed by gray skies and the promise of more snow. And somewhere deep in my chest, a quiet resolve settled in like warmth after winter. They had built a version of me in silence, but I'd rewritten it in ink. And this time, I wasn't erasing a single word. I didn't get closure. I built it. The letter came folded neatly inside a plain white envelope, dropped into my mailbox like any other bill or flyer. No ceremony, no courthouse visit, just a short notice with my name at the top. Case dismissed. I stood on the tiny porch of Jessie's apartment, reading the words twice before finally letting the paper fall back into my lap. That was it. No fight, no dramatic last stand, just silence. And for once, the silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like peace. It was mid-March, and the chill in the Ohio air had finally begun to lift. Dogwood trees bloomed shyly on the edges of sidewalks. Kids on bikes zipped past with untied shoelaces and open jackets. I could hear birds outside my window in the mornings again, small things that didn't matter when you were surviving, but felt like miracles once you started living. That weekend, I signed the lease to my new apartment, just a modest one-bedroom on the edge of downtown, tucked above a hair salon and next to a quiet used bookstore that always smelled like lavender and paper. My name, and only my name, was on the contract. Jessie helped me move in. Between the two of us and her squeaky hatchback, we managed in a single Saturday. The furniture was secondhand, most of it from garage sales and thrift stores, but to me it felt like treasure. A blue corduroy couch that creaked when you sat down, a coffee table with one uneven leg I fixed with a folded coaster, and on the shelf above my tiny writing desk, I placed the crooked red birthday candle, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of survival. I arranged it beside a mason jar of wildflowers Jessie had picked up on her way over. For luck, she said, placing them down without comment. The scent of daisies filled the room like a quiet blessing. That night, after Jessie left, I sat on the floor in my pajamas with a takeout sandwich and a root beer, letting the room wrap itself around me. It didn't echo. It didn't ache. It felt mine. The next morning, a small card appeared under my door. No name, no return address. Just plain ivory paper and a single sentence written in tidy, deliberate handwriting. You were never the problem. They feared what they couldn't control. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't need to know who sent it, because the truth of it rang louder than any name could. A few days later, I took a walk downtown. The air smelled like wet pavement and new beginnings. I passed the diner where Dad used to brag loudly over coffee, the library where Mom once cried after her car broke down and I gave her my last $60 to fix it, buildings once loaded with memories, now just bricks and windows and strangers inside. No one stared, no one whispered, and even if they had, I wouldn't have flinched. Zach texted me that afternoon, just a photo of his dog in a sweater and the words, "Proud of you, cousin." I sent back a heart. Sometimes you don't need long conversations, just proof that someone sees you. Back home, I pulled out a new journal, a soft blue cover with gold lettering. I hadn't written in months. Everything I'd said had been typed, posted, documented. But this time, I wanted the scratch of pen against paper. On the first page, I wrote, "Sometimes choosing yourself means losing everything you thought you needed, but it also means finally meeting the version of you that was waiting to be born." I underlined it once, slowly. Outside my window, the street lamp flickered on. My apartment glowed in soft lamplight. The air was still, no phone buzzing, no guilt ringing in my ears. Just the slow hum of a fridge, the creak of old floorboards, the sound of myself breathing. This wasn't victory. It was something quieter, something steadier. Liberation. And from here, with no one pulling the strings, no one writing the narrative for me, I could finally see the horizon. Mine. As I looked out the window of that small apartment, no more calls, no more guilt, I realized the silence wasn't empty. It was a beginning. Sometimes holding on to yourself means letting go of what no longer feels like home. Family without kindness or respect is just a word. At any age, we all deserve a space where we feel safe and seen, not for what we give, but for who we are. And maybe the bravest thing isn't forgiveness. It's choosing to stop breaking yourself to keep someone else whole. If this story reminded you of something in your own life or someone you once loved, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Sometimes sharing is the first step toward healing.